I think the Xenoblade games are most well known for their stories, great characters and beautiful areas. But one other thing I enjoyed in every Xenoblade game are the battle systems. I'm gonna be honest though, most of these games don't have well balanced party members. You always have a few characters who can inflict some insane damage or have some other overpowered traits. On the other side of the coin, some of your allies will struggle to keep up for one reason or another. In this video, I'm going over all the Xenoblade games, look at who is the worst party member in each of them and explain why they are the worst. Just keep in mind, this is not meant to be a hate video. I'll approach this from an objective angle and everything I'll say is purely based on gameplay. If I say bad things about the character you like, please don't take it too personally, and more importantly, don't let me stop you from playing these games however you want with the characters you like. With that out of the way, let's get started with Xenoblade 1. I think most of you will have heard at least one person say that Sharla is the least useful party member, and that's definitely true. For some people it might not be obvious why, however, so here are the 3 big reasons why she's generally seen as the worst option. Reason number 1. Her healing does not make up for her low damage. Sharla is way too specialized in healing her allies, to the point that 12 out of her 16 arts don't do any damage and only heal or support. Don't get me wrong, when you've taken damage, healing is obviously useful. You'll just rarely need this much of it. Note that I also said when you've taken damage, because the first Xenoblade in particular just has a lot of ways where you can avoid taking hits altogether. If Shulk gets a vision, he can use his Monado arts to stop most attacks. If you keep enemies topple locked, they'll never get to hurt you. Once Dunban has enough agility, he can dodge almost everything and never need healing. There are even more examples, but you get the point. Now yes, it's impossible to dodge every attack, and some enemies are immune to break and topple, so healing is still important. But you don't need to sacrifice your damage output for a good healer. 3 other party members can heal as well, and just having 1 or 2 healing arts is usually enough to get by, especially when combined with visions, Monado arts, evasion or one of the other 10 ways to cheat death in this game. If you put Sharla on your team, you greatly handicap your damage output in return for extra healing that you won't even need most of the time. Shulk, Riki and arguably Melia can all bring enough support to the table while also being able to do actual damage. Which brings me to my second point, bad synergy in chain attacks. Not only does Sharla inflict low damage herself, but she can also make the rest of your party do less damage. By activating chain attacks and using multiple attacks of the same color, you can reach insane numbers, since every consecutive attack will get stronger. Once again, Sharla's lack of offensive options just makes it harder for her to contribute, which means you'll often lose the damage increase when it's her turn. She only has 1 red art for example, which she only learns at level 42. For half of the game, you can't make the most out of physical damage in chain attacks with her on your team. Sharla does however have 2 ether attacks, but one of them doesn't even do any damage. Her talent art also can't even be used in chain attacks. In case you didn't know, these grey attacks are basically the 4 color cards in Uno. You can use them to follow up on any color, and after them you can also use any color you want, as long as you're not Sharla. And that's also what my final point is about, her cool off mechanic. Sharla might already sound not so flattering up until now, but for some reason the developers were afraid she would be too good or something, because they nerfed her even further with a mechanic exclusive to her. Almost every art she uses will fill up the talent gauge, and once it's full, she has to cool off her rifle, making her a sitting duck for 5 to 10 seconds. This alone brings even more problems with it. You can't use it in chain attacks, meaning that she doesn't have the wild card that literally everyone else has. If Sharla is controlled by the AI, you also constantly have to pay attention that she's not cooling down when you start a chain attack, or else she just won't even participate. I think I've driven the point home by now, but I just wanna say, Sharla is not useless. The best way I can describe her is that she's like a safety net. If you're not well equipped for battles, she will make sure that you'll survive for much longer. She's especially useful when you first get her, since you don't have that many options to cheat death yet. You do have to keep in mind, however, that she will make battles last longer since she doesn't do much damage, which just means that there are more chances for the enemies to overwhelm you, one-shot you, or to kill someone while she's cooling down. Compared to all other party members, the things she brings to the table just aren't worth it, especially when it will actively hinder your team. Sorry to all Sharla fans for being so harsh, but I just want to be thorough here and explain my points as clearly as possible. I have nothing against people that like using her, and I don't want to make anyone feel bad. I only want to criticize how Sharla was designed as a fighter, and the same obviously goes for all upcoming characters. Well, that took longer than expected. Thankfully, I won't have to spend a lot of time on the next worst party member, because next up is Future Connected, Xenoblade 1's DLC campaign that isn't DLC. There are only 4 party members in this game, and 2 of them are Nopon that took all of their arts from Ryan and Sharla. So every single point I made about Gado's #1 fan also goes for Kino. Because of some changes to the combat though, the heal-centric gameplay of Sharla and Kino is actually more useful in Future Connected. You can't get visions anymore, and there's no dodge tank either, so you'll be taking a lot more damage. There are also no chain attacks anymore, so you don't have to worry about the character synergy either. It's actually kinda funny how Kino in his game is a more viable choice than Sharla, only because he's in a context where he doesn't have awful synergy with half of the game mechanics. Even with all of that though, Kino still isn't good for much outside of healing. When it comes to the other party members, Nene is indispensable since she's the only tank, while both Shulk and Melia are good attackers that also have access to healing and ways to reduce damage. Still, I do want to emphasize that Kino can still be a viable pick, if only because you have way less options in Future Connected. But with all of the first game covered, we can now move on to game number 2 in the franchise. Xenoblade Chronicles X? Yeah, those titles were a bit confusing in hindsight. This is a weird game in the series for many reasons. It does a lot differently from every other Xenoblade. For example, there are 19 playable characters. Everyone still has a somewhat unique playstyle, however, thanks to the class system. Every character has a combination of a melee weapon, like a sword, alongside a ranged weapon, typically a gun. And those weapons determine what arts you have access to. Your customizable main character can freely switch between them, but the 18 remaining characters will always have the same weapons. As you can expect, at least one of them had to get screwed over with the arts they were stuck with. And the Blade member who has it the worst is Hope. It actually pains me to say this, because she's my favorite side character in this game. The problem is that Hope is made to be a support party member in a game where you don't need support from party members. X is the Xenoblade game where teamwork within your group is the least required. The funniest example of this is that most good players or speedrunners don't even bother to revive their fallen party members, since you can solo everything with overdrive anyway. Because Hope is so centered around support, her art selection is very lackluster. In Xenoblade X, you have some busted arts that can give you a bunch of TP, that can make you straight up invincible, or arts that can just delete enemies. And of course, Hope has access to none of them. She has some good healing or support moves, but her damage is really low, and she has a hard time generating TP to use some of her better arts anyway. Hope does have some interesting debuffs, like Brain Jack, where she literally brainwashes enemies to fight for you. That's awesome. But sadly, all of these debuffs are unreliable since they can be resisted by enemies. Hope is still usable, but you would be better off by putting any other character on your team. Hey, look man, you can't blame her for any of this. In the story, Hope is a mediator who barely has any fighting experience. She's not that good on the battlefield, but she tries anyway, which means she's still more useful than Tatsu. Yeah, this little shit is lucky I didn't count him for this list. You can say he's technically a party member, but he doesn't even fight alongside you in battles. That's the only reason why I didn't pick him as the Xenoblade X representative. But at the very least, we can all know that everyone else in this video is not nearly as useless as this guy. And with that rant out of the way, we can finally talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 2. It's actually a bit hard for me to talk about this game, because I consider most party members a spoiler. Thankfully, I won't need to spoil anything, because the worst driver in this game is definitely Nia. You might start to see a pattern here, as Nia is designed to be the healer of the group. Well, drivers can technically be any class depending on what blades they have equipped, but the problem with Nia isn't even that she only heals and doesn't do any damage. With her, it really is just an issue of being outclassed when it comes to most weapon types. Aside from Torna, every driver can use all blade types, but they all have 4 unique arts and different attacking speeds for every single weapon type. Nia just happens to be the least practical choice for most of these. She doesn't have any outstanding arts for the lance, katana or shield hammer weapons. Her attacks are decent on the Great Axe and the Ether Cannon though, since they give her access to topple and break respectively. But her attacking speed on both of these weapons is really slow. Both of these options are generally better on your other party member from Tantal, who has similar arts but faster animations. That only leaves the rings, bitball and knuckle claws, which are a good choice on her, and what a surprise, those are the 3 healer weapons. She has 2 main uses with these weapons. The first is obviously healing, while the second is helping out with driver combos. With the knuckle claws, she has a launch art with a sick animation, while both the rings and the ball give her a break art. Like Sharla, Nia is irreplaceable for the early game, since she will probably be the one to inflict break on most of your opponents. However, once you build Poppy Cutie Pie for Torna, she gets outclassed in that department too. Some of Nia's break arts might have multiple hits, but only one of those hits actually inflicts break. Torna's Speedy Sword, however, hits 3 times and all those 3 hits have a chance to break the opponent. This might sound weird, but some people call this the best attack in Xenoblade 2 because of that. To put it into perspective, let's say an enemy has a 50% resistance to break. Now, what sounds better? An attack that gives you one 50% chance for a break, or an attack that gives you 3 50% chances for a break? Yeah, sorry Nia, but you just lost one of your 2 uses. Hey, at least she's still the best driver for healing, right? Yeah, if you've already beaten Chapter 7, you know that Rex basically gets the most overpowered healing blade in the whole game, which really is the only one you need on your team. I also haven't even touched upon the fact that the Bitball and Claws are arguably better on other drivers, and that some of the DLC healers are good on literally everyone. Yeah, Nia is definitely the worst driver. But you can also ask who the worst blade is. Look, I'm not gonna spend too much time on this. There are already a lot of blade tier lists out there which say that it's Electra. The shield hammer already sucks as a weapon in general, but Electra has some of the worst damage output in the game. Some common blades can even be stronger than her. So she's supposed to be a tank blade, you know, a role that's supposed to take the aggro, and yet she struggles a lot with taking the aggro because her attacks are just that weak. Some other blades that are in contention for being the worst are Finch and Godfrey. And look at that, those are 2 other shield hammers. If you want to be technical, you could say that the worst possible combination in Xenoblade 2 is Nia as the driver with Electra, Finch and Godfrey as her blades. So you have a driver with slow auto attacks and terrible arts and 3 tank blades that all struggle with tanking. Now that would suck. Next up, we will go back to the past for Xenoblade 2's DLC, Torna the Golden Country. From here, it actually gets pretty hard to determine who the worst party members are. Torna is the first Xenoblade game where I honestly think no party member jumps out as the worst or least useful. It definitely helps that there are only 3 drivers to begin with, who all have 2 blades each. You can't really bench any of them, but thankfully Laura, Adam and Hugo are all irreplaceable. These guys really are some of the most overpowered party members we've ever gotten. That means I'm looking at their blades, and I ended up choosing between 2 of them, Haze and Aegeon. Both have their upsides. Haze is the only party member that's focused on healing and support, while Aegeon is the evasion master of this game. They also have the same downside however. Say it with me, low damage output. In the end however, I decided to go with Aegeon for this one, meaning that we finally have our first non-healer for this video. There are 2 reasons why I chose Aegeon over Haze. 1, he's supposed to be a tank. Haze's low damage is fine because she's only supposed to heal. But just like Electra, Aegeon will struggle to take the aggro in the first place. And my second reason is that he's just way less flexible than Haze. She can heal, boost everyone's damage, reduce incoming damage, and freeze the enemy in place. Now, let's see what a Gion has. He can evade attacks with his arts, and he has a skill that boosts evasion, and a skill that boosts evasion, and a skill that boosts evasion. Look, dodge tanking is useful, and I just want to emphasize that both Haze and Aegeon are both still viable. However, from all Torna members, Aegeon is by far the least flexible one. He can dodge really well, but there's not much else. Torna marks a bit of a turning point for this video. Sharla was by far the worst party member in Xenoblade 1, but with every game it's becoming less and less obvious who the worst character is. That's especially the case for Xenoblade 3. There are 6 main party members here, and they can all be pretty much identical in terms of usefulness, since you can give all of them the exact same classes and skills. I guess you can say that the worst of these 6 is anyone aside from Noah, since only he has the busted Lucky 7. You can make many arguments on who's the worst of the remaining 5. I'd say it's Lance, since he and Senna have the lowest TP in chain attacks, while Lance also has a slightly lower attack stat than Senna. It doesn't really matter much anyways, because the actual worst party member in 3 is definitely one of the hero characters. Many other people have already made tier lists for this, and the characters that seem to rank the lowest on these the most often are Juniper and Triton. Triton is an interesting case, because his Soul Hacker class is one of the best in the game, since it can give you a huge selection of arts and skills. The man himself, however, will always be stuck to the arts and skills he had from the beginning. Hey, at least it's consistent, which is something you can almost never say about Triton. I swear, everything else this guy has feels gambling related somehow. His chain order will randomly increase everyone's TP by a number between 6 and 18, while his heroic chain will either add 50 TP or subtract 50 TP from him. I honestly think the whole idea behind his playstyle is just hilarious. Sometimes you'll get lucky and he will let you reach insanely high TP, but other times he'll be useless. On the other hand though, we have Juniper, who's in every way outclassed by Gray, a character that you'll have access to earlier than Juniper. Oh man, this is Xenoblade balance at its finest. Juniper's hero chain adds a flat 50 to the damage multiplier every time you choose them. Gray's hero chain, however, multiplies the damage by 1.5 every time you use it. They also have the exact same chain order, and Gray just has straight up stronger attacks than Juniper. So the question for this video is, who's worse? There's Juniper, who's outclassed by an earlier party member in every way, and Triton, who will roll a dice to decide whether he'll be decent or absolute trash. You can make arguments for both, but I'm gonna say the worst is Juniper. On average, I think Triton will just contribute more. He has a topple art while Juniper has nothing for combos, and on a good day, Triton can single-handedly reach 100 TP. That at least makes him worth using sometimes. Juniper, on the other hand, is never worth using over Gray, unless you just really like them. And to finish it off, we have the finale of the Cloud Saga, Future Redeemed. Just like Torna, this DLC has some of the most overpowered party members we've ever seen in a Xenoblade game. Rex is a force of nature that will destroy everything. Matthew can spam an art literally every second, while both Glimmer and A are both indispensable healers that offer their own unique utility. Sadly, the 2 tanks in this game both lag behind. From the 2 of them though, Nickel is slightly worse. This is the 3rd time I said it in this video. He's supposed to be a tank, yet he will never tank anything because he can't hold the aggro. To be fair, it's near impossible to do more damage than Rex and Matthew, but this could have easily been fixed if we took a page out of Torna's book. Emperor Hugo could force his enemies to lock onto himself with his talent art, regardless of how much aggro other party members were building up. This single-handedly made Hugo one of the best tanks in the entire series. Shulk in Future Redeemed tried something similar. With Monado Rage, he can inflict target lock, but sadly that's counted as a debuff for the enemy, and Xenoblade 3 is infamous for having enemies with high debuff resistances. At least it's still more than Nickel, who has no way to force the enemies to target him and worse damage output than Shulk. I think it says a lot when the best use some people found for Nickel is to just give him a memory locket accessory to help revive people, since they know he will never die because of his great defenses and the fact that he will never get the aggro. However, there was a party member in Future Redeemed that I completely forgot about. I'm gonna give what's surprisingly my only spoiler warning in this entire video, because I'm gonna talk about the post-game of Future Redeemed now. If you want to avoid any spoilers, you should probably leave the video, but thanks anyway for watching up until here. Anyways, the actual worst party member in Future Redeemed is Nael. She can join you after you beat the final boss, but you can't even control her, so that already sucks. But what's worse is that she can mess up your chain attacks. In Future Redeemed you have these team up attacks with unity pairs. To get the most damage in chain attacks, you'll need to use the strategy of the two characters in a chosen pairing, and it's already random if you'll even get the chance from the game. Nael also has a strategy that can show up in chain attacks, meaning that you'll have to play around her on top of your other party members to get the unity pairing that you want. Some of you might think to give her Tactics Manual 14, since it will refill your chain attack gauge. This effect was based on Fiona's chain order from Xenoblade 3's base game, and if it worked exactly like that one, it would have been great. However, in Future Redeemed it will only fill up 1/3 of your chain attack gauge, which is only enough for one more round. If you only have 6 characters in your party, that means you'll still be guaranteed to get the 2 characters from the unity pairing that you want. Once you have 7 characters though, you'll lose that guarantee. Having Nael on your team is definitely not worth giving that up. She will do some decent damage on the field, but it doesn't matter since chain attack finishers are the best way to kill enemies anyway. Nickel at least has the niche of being an unkillable reviver that can also quickly launch enemies. But Nael can't even break, topple or launch. Instead, her whole gimmick is centered around debuffs, which are infamous in Xenoblade 3 for not working. It was a cool idea to make Nael a reward for the post-game, but she doesn't contribute as much as any other party member and is actively a hindrance most of the time. If you're a diehard Nael fan, you can still make her work of course, as you can with any of the characters on this list, but I personally have a save file without her to play the post-game. But there you have it, the least useful party member in every Xenoblade game so far. This was just a random idea I had once, but it was pretty interesting to look at. Just keep in mind that this is all according to my own research. I used facts to back up everything I said, but again, in some cases there's still some room for arguments. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. If you want to help me out and you think the video deserved it, you can like, comment and or subscribe. This has been MaxMonado signing out.